Hello there, beautiful friends from around the world. I'm your host, Blackenfist, and I am here to give you guys a discussion about one of the Dragon Ball characters and how over the years his character has changed. But I am not alone because I am here with the Dragon Ball Dissection creator himself, MistareFusion.
Hello, it's nice to be here. Thanks for having me on. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, and I'm glad to have you on here, helping me out, and I couldn't have thought of a better person to actually for this topic. I did hear that Kazenchu podcast that you were on, and this was something that was on my mind, and actually something that when Dragon Ball Minus first came out, of course, maybe we're a little bit late, but better late than never.
Well, I always agree with a certain philosophy that it's not always best to strike while the iron is hot. I don't think there's anything wrong with waiting a little bit.
We're here to talk about Bardock, and I think that it would be appropriate for us to start the none other than the TV special, since that's going to be pretty much the first thing that actually came out chronologically than episode of Bardock or Dragon Ball Minus. And I think that the Bardock special, in the eyes of most fans, has really shaped who Bardock is in the minds of most fans. I think most people would agree, even though, as it's been stated, it's really not canon to the manga. None of the events that happened in the Bardock special really were written down in the manga itself, but it's kind of a case in which even fans that are so faithful to the manga really like that Bardock special. So I think it's important to talk about how Bardock was in the Bardock special. So, MistareFusion, why don't you take it off? How was Bardock in the Bardock special?
The Bardock special is pretty unique when it comes to Dragon Ball media. Oh, first of all, it was the first time that Toei ever did a double-length special type of episode, and a lot of people, especially in America, think it's a movie, but it's actually, as you said, a television special. And it's sort of a darker type of story than Dragon Ball usually tells. It's not the same. It's a very different tone, very different structure, and almost entirely different characters. It's very much a distant prequel type of thing, and most of the characters that we do know have only very minor roles.
I believe Toriyama said that he wouldn't have written it himself.
Oh, of course, yeah. Toriyama, even as famous as he is for the action in Dragon Ball, is still at his roots a gag manga artist. He prefers comedy. He prefers simpler types of stories. He prefers having fun, lighthearted adventures. And even when things get dark and brooding in Dragon Ball, it always comes around, the hero triumphing in the end, and everybody lives happily ever after. And the Bardock special is, it's totally at odds with the kind of stories that Toriyama usually tells. But it's a prequel, but at the same time, what makes the Bardock special, it's not terribly fan servicey. In certain ways it is. I mean, obviously, his design is basically an evil Goku clone. He's made to look almost just like Goku. In the original special, he's voiced by Goku's voice actress.
Better version of Tullus, or Turles, however you prefer.
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny. Yeah, they actually, both of those came out at around the same time. Tullus beat Bardock by just a few months, really. It was actually that close. The movie 3 came out just a few months before this Bardock special did.
Do you think that character had any effect on Bardock himself?
It's hard to tell in terms of timelines of things, because obviously the movies have to have a larger prep time than even a TV special would. So who knows when the genesis of what concepts were, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if they didn't think, the idea of an evil Goku-like Saiyan, we should dust that one off and do that one again, only make it Goku's father this time. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if that was the case, but as far as I know, nothing's really been said to connect these characters that way.
Well, except for appearance, of course.
Right. Nothing's been said from any creative source with knowledge to say that, yes, this was a conscious decision to, do this again. But what I find special about the Bardock special is that Bardock is not special. He does get a really awesome power, but the main thrust of the story is this is a guy who tries to change his destiny in the sense of the greatest types of tragedies. He just can't succeed in what he's doing. He ultimately fails. He is barely remembered by anybody. It's a long series of failures, and he has one moment of hope at the end. But aside from that, he comes and goes is barely a blip on anybody's radar, and the only reason we care about him is because we are invested emotionally in his story.
I actually like your point, because Bardock in the special definitely seemed temperamentally the same as all Saiyans. Perhaps he was a bit exceptional in his fighting prowess, was not as typical for his own class, but that's a Saiyan thing. That was still something that Saiyans really admired in themselves. He wasn't completely different from all the other Saiyans in terms of how his character was and what he did and what he believed in before, at least, what the events happened in the special. We could imagine Bardock was a pretty typical Saiyan for pretty much his whole life.
It's funny, since you mentioned battle powers is not something I discuss that frequently. It's not something that terribly interests me. But I do find it interesting that, and it's one of the main things I think that detracts from my theory or supposition that Bardock is not special, is the fact that he has a battle power that's more than twice of what Nappa's is 25 years later. He's more than halfway to what Vegeta would be as an adult.
That's actually true. And keep in mind, Bardock is supposedly a low class, so...
Yeah, so I admit I've never really liked that very much, and I kind of wish that one little line hadn't been in there. It would have made more sense had he been, quite a bit weaker, but whatever.
So in the Bardock special, it seems that Bardock was, for lack of better purposes, he was a little bit evil. He liked to destroy people's lives and ruin entire planets. It seemed like he liked his job.
Oh, he was very evil.
Like I said before, it seemed that he didn't really differ from any other Saiyan. And this was really the version of Bardock that everyone had, and a lot of people thought, oh yeah, what a badass that he stood up against someone so much stronger. Even though he knew the odds, he still instead tried to resist. And this was the version of Bardock that, for a long time, was the image that a lot of fans created in their own heads.
It's also worth mentioning, while we can sympathize with Bardock because of the struggles he goes through, it's important, I think, especially with what's coming up, is that this is not a tale of Bardock trying to redeem himself. He doesn't become a good guy. He doesn't have any interest in being better than he is. He just wants to defeat Frieza because Frieza's turning on them. So he never changes from being an evil guy, and I think that's really important to remember, is that he's our protagonist, but he's an evil bastard.
His main motivation, obviously, is that he doesn't want to see his home planet destroyed. I'm assuming that he cares about himself and he doesn't want to die himself, and I'm pretty sure that he did feel betrayed by the fact that Frieza had ordered the death of his own friends. That probably ticked him off a lot, and that probably was the motivation for him to going up against him. But at the end of the day, I don't think any fundamental core of who Bardock was changed. I think that he would still enjoy fighting and slaughtering. Maybe this time it would just be slaughtering Frieza, though. But just for now, I just want to skip over episode of Bardock, and I want to go into Dragon Ball Minus, because I think that the Bardock from the special and the Bardock from Dragon Ball Minus are like almost on two different spectrums. When I first read Dragon Ball Minus, obviously everyone was excited to see Goku's mother and everything, and I was excited too, just to see what Dragon Ball Minus was about. And there was a couple things that popped out at me on Dragon Ball Minus that I might talk about later, but one of the biggest things that really did pop out at me was Bardock, and the fact that Bardock was really different, to the point where I remember when I finished reading it, I remember thinking to myself, well, it seems that Bardock is essentially a completely different character. He's completely different. This is not the Bardock that we knew from the special, and I guess I should have expected that, because the special, as we have said before, it was something that, Toriyama had not written. It was something that Toriyama said that he wouldn't have written himself. I should have expected that maybe perhaps Dragon Ball Minus would have been radically different from the special, or, a bit different from the special.
It's certainly interesting to note, though. I mean, I think it's understandable why you and other fans would assume that. I mean, because even though Toriyama did not write the special and said he wouldn't write something like the special, he did later retroactively include what at least appeared to be a scene from the end of the Bardock special in a chapter of the manga. And so while it never actually explicitly said, oh, this is the same, psychic Bardock that we saw in the special, it was close enough that I'm sure for the past nearly 25 years, it was a pretty safe assumption to say, okay, at least some of this Toriyama seems to have accepted into his own story, which is kind of unprecedented. But the fact of the matter is, it did never say. All he showed was that Bardock was killed by Frieza, so I kind of went into it thinking it was a possibility there might be something different, and he actually even looking forward to the idea that he might do something different. But I can certainly see why fans would be like, wait, what? That's not the Bardock I know, and didn't Toriyama say was giving a nod to this material? What's going on here?
For me, it was just more of just expecting it. I really didn't give it much thought. I just expected Bardock to be the same. The fact that Bardock is a little bit warmer, he's also a little bit more keen on what Frieza's doing somehow. That's something that I actually didn't like about Dragon Ball Minus, is that for some reason out of nowhere it seems that Bardock is suspicious of Frieza with, it seems, no reason whatsoever, just because Flat demands that Goku must be sent out of the planet. But I really didn't like the fact that his intuition was so great that he just felt like, oh, Frieza's plotting against us, we have to do something. But took me into an interest is that Bardock, it's explained, he was a more of a typical Saiyan in Dragon Ball Minus, but it's explained that he was slowly changed by Goku's mother himself into a good person, and slowly but surely Gine, Goku's mother, was able to melt away that hard exterior that I guess many fans would have in their heads of that previous Bardock that was in the special. At least that's the way I interpreted it. This was Toriyama's way of saying, okay, well, that Bardock that you knew, this is the Bardock that is in here, and this is the reason why, because of Goku's mother.
I don't know if it says it explicitly in the material itself, but certainly in interviews where he said that they're different from normal Saiyans because they don't usually have a family unit, they don't usually settle down and mate. Although, I mean, I will say, this certainly is a softer, fluffier Bardock. I still would definitely classify him as evil. He still has the same job. He still kills people and likes doing it. But he definitely is set apart personality-wise. Put on a level, it seems, above the rest of the members of his race, which is a bit unsettling.
That's actually something that not just Bardock but also Goku's mother Gine was too, that both of Goku's parents seem to be special anomalies among their race.
Oh, especially Gine, even more so with Gine, I think.
Yeah, even more so with her, because apparently she's the one who turned Bardock into the way he is right now. So I think it was Bardock who even stated that it was her that was starting to change him. And I honestly never liked this idea of Goku's parents being this way, of being so different from other Saiyans, being so special and so nice in comparison, obviously in comparison to the others, because I feel it diminished Goku, and it diminishes Goku's character and almost everything that Goku stands for, and the events that happened in Dragon Ball, for instance, Goku hitting his head. Well, what significance does that make anymore now that we know that his parents really weren't that bad people in comparison to everyone else?
Well, I'm not really that critical of the head trauma at the very least, because it's weird. When we do see Goku in Dragon Ball Minus, he does seem a bit more helpless and stuff, but then we saw him a little bit earlier, for us, chronologically later, in the last chapter of Jocko, the Galactic Patrolman, which Dragon Ball Minus is a bonus chapter of, and we do see that he's somewhat wild, so I guess it's not terribly contradicted in that sense. And as I said, I mean, Bardock is still evil, he just cares for his family. What really bothers me about it in terms of the story, it's not something that's terribly explicitly contradicted, but more in terms of the theme of it. And well, first of all, it's just I find Dragon Ball Minus bad in general. It's too short to tell the kind of story it wants to, so everything feels rushed. Sort of like what you said about Bardock's quote-unquote intuition. There wasn't any time to give him a legitimate reason to know why, so it's just, oh, I know why. Everything is just, so I don't feel like I know this Bardock at all, really, other than the fact that he loves his son and his wife. There's really nothing about Bardock in that story beyond that, because it's so short.
I want to move on just a little bit from Dragon Ball Minus, because I do want to get to episode of Bardock.
Oh, do we have to?
For whatever reason, actually, even though as much as I dislike Dragon Ball Minus, I, for some reason, just dislike episode of Bardock just a tinsy tiny bit more. I don't know why, and I know people that watch me know this because I've called it official fanfiction, expressed my discontent with how episode of Bardock was, and perhaps the only reason I disliked the episode of Bardock just a little bit more was because it was longer, and Dragon Ball Minus was so short that, it was over with pretty quick. But in the episode of Bardock, obviously, Bardock is also being portrayed in a slightly different manner from the way in Dragon Ball Minus and even in the Bardock special. But in some ways, I almost feel like I drew a connection when I was watching that and when I read Dragon Ball Minus, because it seemed that the Planteans, they were softening up Bardock just the way it was claimed that Goku's mother did the same way to him in Dragon Ball Minus. And I just found that interesting that in both of these things, Bardock was supposedly softened up just a bit more from the way he previously was. And I always feel that, the way he previously was is because, the fans have the image of Bardock in their heads is in the Bardock special, who is, I guess we would say, the hardest version of Bardock, and then he gets softened up. Because I think Toriyama, that's their way of saying, okay, well, we're going to soften the version of Bardock that you have in your heads up to this. And I don't know if that's in a correct way to see it, but that's kind of the way I've always seen it. But I always felt that was interesting that in both stories, we see Bardock being softened up.
I never really thought about that before. That's actually really cool. I guess it depends on which way you think it's working. Is it to go into Star Wars fandom, is it a Han shot first kind of thing, where the creator himself has a conscious decision to soften a character because he or she thinks that, oh, this person is just too bad, I'm setting a bad example, and I need to change this? Or is it more of a Draco and leather pants thing, where it's a fandom who sees an evil character and sympathizes with them and goes, oh, they're really not that bad, they're misunderstood? Because, I mean, if you go to episode of Bardock, which is the first time this softening happens, this is written by Oishi Naho, who herself is an admittedly, unashamedly Bardock fangirl, and this story seems to sort of treat him as he's really not that bad, he has love in his heart, he's just misunderstood, and like you said, it feels like fan fiction for that sense, because a lot of fan fiction authors will take...
I feel it's also kind of like fan fiction because of just how things are not explained, or explained at all, like Bardock being sent to the past for no apparent reason.
Oh god, that is so weird and stupid.
That seems very fanfiction-esque, that, Bardock's about to die and the whole planet's about to explode, but he gets sent back to the past because I want to tell this story, and I give no explanation. I feel that sounds very fanfiction-esque.
And then, of course, you get into all the problems of, if this is time travel, does it work like time travel that Trunks does, where you're not actually traveling to the past, you're actually making a new timeline? Is any of this really happened in the Dragon Ball world that we know? What is this? It's so weird and so, like you said, kind of an excuse for itself. It's like, oh well, we want a story where Bardock travels in time, so yeah, he travels in time by explosion.
I wonder how the mechanics of that work out.
Yeah, does that mean... Wait, so does that mean, like, that everybody else Frieza killed, or do they get sent back in time, too? Or are they like Saiyans in the Renaissance, or...
I feel it's that Bardock was the only special one there, so... But that really brings back to how Bardock really was in this special.
Way too special.
I almost want to go forward in time and where we see Bardock turning into a Super Saiyan and then freaking out Chilled, who's supposedly Frieza's ancestor. And this is the reason why Frieza's family has such a fear of the Super Saiyans and this fear of the legend. It's implied maybe this is the reason why Frieza destroyed the planet Vegeta, because his fear was overwhelming him because of his ancestor seeing this Super Saiyan. What do you think about the idea of just turning Bardock into a Super Saiyan? I don't know why, and for the longest time, I couldn't put it into words why I really didn't like that.
Try to imagine, if you will, you just read Romeo and Juliet, and the characters, they die. They kill themselves. Their love does not work out. Everything is sad. It's a tragedy. And then you find out there's a sequel where they magically come back to life and fall in love and get married and raise kids and live in a house with a white picket fence and live happily ever after, and all their dreams come true. That's basically what episode of Bardock is to the Bardock special, where we have this low-class, run-of-the-mill guy who tries his best and fails. But now we have the sequel, where not only does he not die, he gets to go back to his planet before it's destroyed and become this almighty savior, and basically gets to kill a stand-in for Frieza. So he gets everything he wants at the end that he wanted in the first one and failed to do.
And see, that's, I think, the reason why I didn't like it is because, guys, I'm going to speak from my head. In my head, the reason I liked Bardock in the first place so much is because of the way he was in the special. And in the special, as we just try to say, Bardock was not the exceptional guy. He was not the one who was destined to do great things. He was the grunt. He was the nobody. He was the faceless man in the army.
Yeah, that's the reason we sympathize with him, because he's He's in over his head. He's normal.
So him turning into a Super Saiyan goes against all of that, and maybe it's a bit unfair for me to judge what happened in episode of Bardock from what I have in my head about the Bardock special, since those are two completely different things. But at the end of the day, I feel that, at least for episode of Bardock, maybe Dragon Ball Minus has an excuse a little bit more, but episode of Bardock is, I think, a little bit more intrinsically intertwined with the Bardock special, considering the fact that it seems that it takes place right at the end of the Bardock special, and then it goes into its own little thing. Even in the beginning of episode of Bardock, Bardock kinda seemed the way he was in the Bardock special, and then gradually they try to soften him up and everything. Bardock can do what, become this hero and the savior that the story demanded of him. At the end of the day, I just really didn't like the way Bardock was just simply turned into a Super Saiyan, because it just went against everything the character was.
Technically, to be completely honest, it's a tie into a video game. They had a form, Super Saiyan form for him, and wanted a story to explain how. But it's so very fan servicey. It's just, oh, this is so cool. He's a Super Saiyan now. But story wise, character wise, like you said, it doesn't fit in with his character. It's just there to impress people.
We said a lot of negative things about episode of Bardock and about Dragon Ball Minus, and I guess our basic gripes with both episode of Bardock and the way Bardock has really changed over the years is that I think that there was an image of how Bardock was in the original Bardock special, and especially with episode of Bardock, that diverted into something that I think went against everything. But with Dragon Ball Minus, perhaps, as you said before, people were more open to change and to how Toriyama would treat this story and everything, but there was just a couple things that impeded that, and maybe some of the changes almost didn't make sense with how Bardock was treated, and especially with how short Dragon Ball Minus was. It really didn't allocate enough time to tell the story that it needed. And from talking to you, I think you're right. We really don't know him that well, especially Goku's mother. Obviously Goku's mother, since we know less of her because that's the first appearance, but we really don't know how Bardock was either in that.
The funny thing is that you kind of assume you do, because you've seen the Bardock special, you know who Bardock is, right? And you have all that information in your head going into it, but then you sort of have to stop and realize, well, yeah, but this Bardock is completely, the little that we know is completely at odds with that Bardock, so obviously everything is off the table. Everything you thought you knew about Bardock does not apply to this Bardock, so all we have to go on is what's in the pages of Dragon Ball Minus, which is not much.
I think that we've talked enough about all the things Bardock, or at least most of the things Bardock, most of the things major to Bardock, and at the end of the day, I want to say that I do like Bardock. I feel episode of Bardock was something that I could have lived without. Dragon Ball Minus seemed like a bit of a disappointment, so I just want to say I don't hate Dragon Ball Minus or episode of Bardock.
I'd like to say that Bardock is a very sort of unique character in Dragon Ball, in terms of the kinds of appearances he's had, the fact that he really has more than one persona, since he's been in the hands of so many different people and so many conflicting things, and that he became such a fan favorite type of character that it sort of influenced the way he was portrayed, just to sort of cater to that. And personally, I think I would be happy if they just put Bardock to bed. I mean, he's dead already anyway. At least some continuities he's dead, I think. I don't even know anymore. But
Bardock, Father of Goku, the TV special, is obviously dead. Episode of Bardock is probably not dead.
Well, I mean, if we assume that episode of Bardock's supposed to be in the same continuity as the Bardock special Bardock.
Well, that's true. Dragon Ball Minus is actually the most interesting because I think Dragon Ball Minus Bardock, considering if it's in the same canon as the manga, he'd probably be dead because Frieza said that he fought with a Saiyan who looked like Goku and killed him.
Yep, and we do see a brief panel of him being exploded, so...
Yes. So we could safely assume that he died. This was a great conversation. I hope that you can come back and have some more Dragon Ball discussions with me.
Well, thank you. I'd love to do it again sometime. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
And if you guys are interested, MistareFusion is responsible for Dragon Ball Dissection, which I believe is an excellent retrospective series about the Dragon Ball manga, and now he's doing the movies and anime as well. So if you're interested in that, you can go check out his channel. The link will be in the description. But as always, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this discussion about Bardock. Hopefully it wasn't too negative. But anyway, guys, I'm Blackenfist, and as always,